This isn't just the story of a cowboy, it's the story of two Apache women who changed his life forever. If you believe even the smallest act of kindness can change everything, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Let's get started. Ethan Callahan had lived his life like a shadow, drifting on the edge of the frontier, never planting roots, never allowing himself to be tied down. Towns came and went, saloons and dusty roads blurring together in memory. His only constant companion was the colt on his hip and the scars that mapped his skin. He had worked cattle drives, fought rail bandits, even carried mail through storms, but he carried nothing of his own. To men like Ethan, the world was a place you passed through, not a place that welcomed you to stay. That night the canyon stretched wide, the sun fading into streaks of blood orange over the jagged cliffs. His horse's hooves clattered against stone. As he followed a trail no one else bothered to ride, that was when he saw it, thin smoke curling into the dimming sky. At first, he thought it must be a prospector's fire or some lonely traveler making camp. But as he rode closer, the sound of shouting and laughter carried on the wind. His instincts prickled sharp. It wasn't the laughter of men at ease. It was cruel, sharp-edged, the kind that promised violence. Ethan slowed his horse, eyes narrowing, as he guided it behind a rise of rock. Peering down, his gut tightened at the sight before him. A small fire burned low, surrounded by 5 rough-looking men, their rifles leaning against stones. And there, in the dirt, 2 young Apache women knelt, their wrists bound tight with rope. They couldn't have been more than 23, their long dark hair tangled, their faces marked with dust and fear. They whispered to each other, their voices trembling, while the outlaws jeered and tossed scraps of food at their feet. The leader of the group, a thick-set man with a scar splitting his lip, kicked one of the women's shoulders, forcing her head down. "Tomorrow," he spat, "we ride to the border. The traders will pay good coin for 2 pretty squaws." The others laughed, talking about money, about drink, about what they would do before selling them. Ethan's hand closed around the butt of his revolver. He'd seen cruelty before, men beaten down by greed and hate. But this was a sickness. His chest tightened, heat rising behind his eyes. He couldn't just sit on his horse and ride on. He slid from the saddle, boots silent against the earth, and crept closer to the camp's edge. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of decision. He had nothing tying him to this world. No land, no family, no reason to stay alive. But those girls, terrified, defenseless, he could not leave them to such a fate. In that moment, his drifting life found purpose. He lifted the revolver, steady hands aiming into the firelight. "Hey!" His voice thundered across the camp. The bandits turned, faces twisted with surprise. In the breath before chaos, silence filled the canyon. Then the guns roared. Ethan's revolver barked fire, dropping the scar-lipped man before he could even reach for his weapon. The others scrambled, cursing, hands grabbing for rifles. Bullets whipped past Ethan's ears, sparking against the rocks. He moved fast, rolling low, firing again and again until the air stank of smoke and blood. One outlaw fell clutching his chest, another dropped with a cry, dust billowing as he hit the ground. But not without cost. Pain seared Ethan's shoulder as a round tore through him, hot blood soaking into his shirt. He gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. When the last shot echoed into silence, the camp lay still. The fire popped, sparks rising, the smell of iron heavy in the air. Ethan staggered forward, vision blurring. His revolver hung loose at his side, smoke curling from the barrel. Around him, the outlaws lay sprawled, their cruelty ended. His legs trembled, strength slipping fast, but he forced himself toward the girls. They stared at him wide-eyed, frozen like deer caught in torchlight. His fingers fumbled with the ropes, cutting them loose with his knife. "You're safe now," he rasped, voice rough, though his own body was failing beneath him. The taller woman, her gaze fierce despite her trembling, caught his arm before he collapsed. Her hands pressed hard against the bleeding wound, her voice whispering in her native tongue, urgent and steady. The other woman slipped under his other arm, steadying his weight with surprising strength. Together they held him upright, guiding him toward the shade of the rocks. Ethan's breath came heavy, pain spreading like fire, but he forced his eyes open to look at them. He had expected fear or mistrust, but what he saw instead was something else. Gratitude, fierce and unspoken, burning brighter than fear. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The canyon wind whistled low, carrying away the smoke. Ethan leaned back against a stone, his blood slick beneath the woman's hands. He looked at them both, their faces streaked with tears, their eyes too old for their young years. Strangers only minutes ago, bound together now by violence and survival. His mind spun with questions, where they came from, what horrors they had faced before this night, but his lips barely formed words. "Stay hidden," he muttered weakly. "Don't let them find you again." But even as he said it, he knew he couldn't walk away. The taller woman met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. Though her English was broken, her meaning was clear. "You save us. Now we save you." Ethan's throat tightened at the weight of her words. He had not fought for thanks, nor for glory. He had fought because it was right, and yet here, bleeding under a canyon sky, he realized something unexpected. In his aimless wandering, in all his lonely years, he had finally stumbled into something that mattered. The bond between them was not chosen, not planned, but born from sacrifice. And sacrifice, he knew, forged stronger ties than blood. The night deepened, stars blooming across the sky, cold air settling over the canyon. The women built a small fire, their movements quick, practiced, cautious. They worked to clean and bind his wound, their hands gentle but sure. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time his eyes opened, he saw their faces watching over him. They did not run, did not leave him to die. Instead, they stayed, silent guardians in the dark, and for the first time in years, Ethan Callahan felt something he had thought lost forever, a sense of belonging, fragile but real. By dawn, the canyon was quiet, the campfire's smoke curling into the pale sky. Ethan stirred weakly, his wound bound with strips of cloth, his colt laid beside him. The women sat nearby, one watching the horizon, the other humming softly under her breath. They had no reason to trust him, yet they had chosen to. And as Ethan looked at them, he realized he had risked his life not out of chance, but because, deep inside, he could no longer bear a world where innocence was left unprotected. And in that choice, everything began to change. The women guided Ethan into their hidden refuge, a hollowed cavern tucked beneath the cliffs where the desert winds couldn't reach. The space was modest, woven mats, clay pots, and the faint scent of herbs lingering in the air. Ethan, weak and pale, lowered himself onto a blanket as the younger woman pressed water to his lips. Every movement was deliberate, careful, as if they were stitching him back into life. His breath came ragged, but their presence, steady and quiet, seemed to anchor him to this earth when pain threatened to pull him away. Time slowed inside the cavern. They used herbs gathered from the canyon floor, crushed sage, yucca root, and desert aloe, to treat his wound. Their hands worked with practiced knowledge, generations of healing passed down through whispers. Ethan flinched at first, but the women's voices were calm, speaking softly in words he didn't always understand. Slowly, the fever broke. He awoke nights later to hear their laughter echoing in the stone chamber, light and fragile, like birds returning after a storm. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like a wanderer. In the quiet days that followed, Ethan learned pieces of their story. Their names were Ayana and Tayanita, both 23, both survivors of a raid that had stolen their families, their home, their world. They had hidden together, relying only on one another and the land's mercy. Hearing their tale, Ethan felt shame creep into his chest. He had once thought himself alone in his suffering, but their losses humbled him. Yet even scarred by grief, they carried strength, moving with grace, like the canyon winds that shaped stone over centuries. He helped where he could, though still weak, gathering wood, fetching water, teaching them how to mend the cabin knife he carried. In return, they taught him things no gun or saddlebag could hold: the songs of the desert, how to read stars, how to hear life in silence. Ethan began to smile without realizing it, the weight on his shoulders loosening each day. The bond between them grew not from words, but from moments. Shared meals, shared silences, shared survival. One evening, firelight painted the cavern walls in gold. Ethan sat against stone, arm bound in cloth, watching as Ayana wove strands of leather and beads with careful fingers. Her eyes flickered to his, dark and steady. "You risked your life," she said softly, her English slow but clear. "Why?" Ethan's chest tightened. He searched for words, each one feeling too small. Finally, he answered, voice rough, "Because no one should be left to suffer alone." The truth hung in the quiet air between them. Ayana said nothing at first, only studied him, her gaze unreadable. Then she reached into the small pouch at her side and pulled out the band she had been weaving. She tied it gently around his wrist. The beads caught the firelight, shimmering like stars. "This is my gift," she whispered. "Not payment, a promise. You are family now." Ethan froze. For years he had drifted nameless across towns, welcomed nowhere, carrying scars no one wanted to see. Yet here, two women who had lost everything called him family. The weight of that word struck deeper than any bullet. Family. Ethan looked down at the bracelet, at the intricate design made with patience and care. His throat tightened, his vision blurred. He had faced death a dozen times without flinching, but this simple act nearly brought him to his knees. He tried to speak, to thank her, but all he managed was a choked breath. The gift was more than gratitude. It was belonging, a place he never thought he deserved. The desert winds outside howled, but inside, silence wrapped around them like warmth. As days turned into weeks, Ethan grew stronger. His wound healed, but something else mended too, the hollow ache that had followed him for years. He no longer counted miles or towns, no longer woke wondering where to drift next. The canyon had given him a new compass, one that pointed not to places, but to people. He began to see the women not as survivors needing his protection, but as equals, brave, fierce, resilient. Together, they made something rare. Not just survival, but a home carved out of hardship. One night, the three of them sat by the fire outside the cavern, stars blazing across the sky. Tayanita hummed a song her mother had once sung, her voice trembling but beautiful. Ayana leaned against Ethan's uninjured arm, her presence quiet but steady. Ethan looked up at the endless sky, then at the bracelet on his wrist. For the first time in years, he felt anchored, not by chains of duty or debt, but by threads of trust, courage, and love. He realized he hadn't just risked his life for them. They had given him life in return. Beneath the starlit desert, three strangers once bound by chance had become something stronger. Ayana's promise held true, family born not of blood, but of choice. And in that choice, Ethan discovered the kind of gift no coin or cattle could ever buy. It was acceptance. It was love. It was the knowledge that even in a world scarred by loss, healing was possible when hearts dared to reach for one another. The cowboy who thought himself cursed to wander had finally found a place, not marked on any map, but held within the hearts of two young women.